The first time I came across the 7 principles of Unitarian Universalism was in 1989 when I entered the first church in Jamaica Plain, Unitarian Universalist for the first time. For a meeting that had no relation to a church service or Unitarian Universalism for that matter. On the wall of the narthex was a rack of brochures, much like the racks on the fireplace mantel in our parlor or on the table in our fellowship hall. They covered a number of topics related to our UU tradition. My interest was piqued more and more as I read through each of the principles on a small card adorned with a flaming chalice, marveling as I did so that I found nothing to disagree with. Certainly not what I expected when looking through the literature of any church. And that reminds me of a comment made by Kay Montgomery, then Executive Vice President of the UUA, when she spoke here on a Sunday morning some 20 years ago. When I found my first UU church, she said, I realized that I was a Unitarian and Universalist and didn't know it. I wonder how many of us have had that same experience. At last year's General Assembly in Pittsburgh, a whiteboard was set up in one of the halls with a question written on the top. What is most important to you about Unitarian Universalism? Only 3 notes had been made up till that time. The one that caught my eye was our 7 principles. Yes, I thought to myself, that's my answer too. If you conduct an online search for the term UU, 7 principles, you will be directed to UUA bylaws. Once there, you will find that Article 2 of the bylaws will list the 7 principles. For now, the commission in charge of revising Article 2 is recommending removing the 7 principles from the bylaws. It is almost certain that that will happen, and that the text in the article will be replaced with an image or a symbol or diagram. The UUA describes it this way. This image is of a chalice with an overlay of the word love on the flame, with 6 outstretched arms that create a circle around each of the core values and form a 6-petal flower shape. Each arm is a different color, and clockwise, they are interdependence, orange, equity, red, transformation, purple, pluralism, blue, generosity, green, and justice, yellow. No one will be prohibited from posting or using the 7 principles, and I'm not sure if the UUA will continue to promote their use, but they will no longer reside in the bylaws. For those of us whose initial attraction to the denomination was through the principles, this feels like a loss. As the final proposal moves through to authorization, though clearly many feel that the transition from a list of principles to an image of core values feels like progress. In any event, I expect that for most of us here, the 7 principles still hold a central place in our self-identification as UUs. We Unitarian Universalists often claim with pride that we honor no dogma and we hold to no creed. But sometimes we are challenged on this. Aren't the 7 principles beliefs? Are they not the foundational beliefs on which the religion rests? The UUA website quotes Reverend Barbara Wells Tenhova in response. The principles are not dogma or doctrine, but rather a guide for us, for those of us who choose to join and participate in Unitarian Universalist religious community. I think that's a fine distinction. The principles exist as a guide to behavior rather than a list of beliefs. Beliefs per se don't require action. Behavior, by definition, is action. And action starts with an attitude of aggressiveness, is the foundation for actions which are confrontational, reactionary, and often violent. An attitude of acceptance is open to a wide variety of outcomes. Our first principle is based on acceptance. We covenant to affirm and promote the inherent dignity, promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. To say that persons have inherent worth means that their worth is based not on their actions, no matter how abhorrent they may be, but is based simply on their humanity, our shared humanity. An alternative to inherent worth is demonstrated worth. We determine whether or not a person is of worth, has dignity, based on their actions. Excuse me. If a person behaves with dignity, they are worthy of being treated with dignity. To understand the first principle in this way is to understand the largeness of the challenge to approach each person as of inherent worth. Many of you know the challenge I've been dealing with 1,000 miles away in Bowling Green, Kentucky, where a family living in my home paid no rent for 4 months, refused to leave until they were evicted, stole my washer and dryer, stove, television and DVD player, destroyed my bed, and left piles of trash throughout the house and an abandoned car on the lawn. Do I treat them as if they have inherent worth and dignity? Or do I claim that worth is relative based on demonstrated behavior? It's a lot easier to claim a principle in principle than when your trust has been violated. If you are human, that's a struggle. You cope with a sense of being violated and the emotions that encourage that, accompany that: anger, outrage, fury, helplessness. Do people really have inherent worth and dignity? It's a question worth exploring in the depths of your own soul. Our second principle states that we affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. Again, I think we start with an attitude. An attitude of compassion recognizes the struggles that others face, strips away prejudice in the name of equity, seeks justice as derived from equity, being fair and impartial. When members of this church and other churches in Middleboro were made aware of the plight of Haitian refugees, some of those members sought ways to help. There were obstacles on both ends. The immigrants felt forced to leave the country of their birth because of natural disasters, such as hurricanes and earthquakes, compounded with political turmoil, including the assassination of their president, compounded further by the lawlessness of roving gangs and the violence associated with that, all of which created economic turmoil. We complain about an inflation rate of 3.1%. Haitians experienced an inflation rate of 34% in 2022. Our unemployment rate is currently 3.9%. Haiti's is about 15%. Knowing these figures and imagining their effects on families allows compassion to arise, to try to find ways to alleviate these burdens. At every meeting of our social justice team, there are updated reports, but little sense of progress. Sometimes compassion means repeated visits to the hotel where the refugees are lodged, and difficulty communicating across language barriers, and repeated calls to town hall to press for just and compassionate treatment, and facing the bureaucratic logjams caused by city, state, and federal agencies negotiating roles and responsibilities. We affirm and promote justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, but we get worn down by bureaucratic inaction. What can we do but hang in there and continue to try? Our third principle states that we affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. It's not hard to answer, how do we embody acceptance of one another? Simply by being open, being curious, being patient, looking for the best in one another. It means accepting a variety of personalities, a variety of styles of interaction, and understanding that we will all have our foibles, and a sense of humor will go a long way towards accepting our differences, our missteps, and our shortcomings. As my colleague, the Reverend James Ishmael Ford, reminded his Facebook friends and me yesterday, quoting the Zen Buddhist monk Shunryu Suzuki, each of you is perfect the way you are, and you could use a little improvement. We encourage spiritual growth through the classes that we offer that expand and deepen our way of looking at the world, our lives, and our life and community. We encourage spiritual growth through a meditation group and a monthly book discussion group. We encourage spiritual growth at each Sunday's worship service. Not all sermons will be inspiring. Some will be challenging. Some will be informational. Some will be more personal than others. All attempt to bridge the divide that exists between persons by pointing out our commonalities and our common struggles. If the music moves you in a way that you have not been moved before, is that evidence of spiritual growth? In my way of understanding, it is. Does a message for all ages help you feel connected to others in a way that you haven't felt before? Or does it deepen an already felt connection? That's spiritual growth. CUPS, our Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, is hosting an Ostara ritual a week from tomorrow to celebrate the vernal equinox, the time when the darkness that has prevailed for the past season is now no more than equal to the light, a time when the light in our days continues to grow. That is surely something worth celebrating, a time worth capturing in an earth-centered ritual. When we align ourselves with the cycle of seasons, I call that spiritual growth. And when we struggle to accept one another, to get past differences of personality and preference in order to create a stronger sense of community, that too is spiritual growth. I believe that the third principle is the most centering of our principles in terms of strengthening our sense of community, spiritual community. The fourth principle is a blood relation of the third. We affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We do this too through our worship services, our adult education classes, our meditation group, and our monthly book discussions. And we have resources that are shamefully underused, primarily in our church library. There are large collections of books on paganism, on our Christian tradition, Eastern religions, literature, sociology, psychology, philosophy, and history, even feminist theology, believe it or not. Resources for a responsible search for truth and meaning. Each of us is on our own spiritual path, formed in part by the traditions in which we were brought up, whether they were religious or secular, formed in part by the family structures that either supported our growth or failed to do that very well, formed in part, too, no doubt, by our genetic inheritance. No dogma restrains us. We are responsible for our own spiritual growth and responsible as a spiritual community to offer what we can to help one another grow on a path that may be ours alone. As a spiritual community, we are interdependent, just as we recognize in our seventh principle that we respect the interdependent web of existence of which we are a part. And respect really does not go far enough. I think we must honor that interdependent web. as a fundamental structure of our existence, the web within which we live, but which we should not seek to dominate. That's not our place. How do we embody the seventh principle? We attend to our surroundings when we are outside. We make time to place ourselves in natural settings and get to know the natural home on which and within which we have placed the structures in which we live, and which too often insulate us from our natural surroundings. We don't, in the vernacular, trash the place. We embody our seventh principle by walking respectfully upon the earth, not overburdening the atmosphere with carbon dioxide and methane, and by working with those organizations that promote reducing our dependence on fossil fuels and increasing our use of sustainable forms of energy. What tools do we have for accomplishing such a task? Our fifth principle affirms and promotes the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and society at large. We must rely on the guidance of conscience which has developed as we have grown spiritually throughout our lives, to tell us how much driving of gasoline-fueled vehicles is too much, how much flying for pleasure is too much, how much our dependence on industrial farming for our food is too much. Our self-education in these areas is part of our spiritual growth. That's the role of conscience. What about the democratic process? In our congregation, we democratically elect the members of the parish committee to provide us with leadership, to see that our decisions align with the provisions of our bylaws, to ensure that policies are in place to guide us in all kinds of areas, from when to cancel church services, to how to provide spaces for rental, to when and why to allow alcohol to be served, and to how to ensure the safety of children and adults while in the building. Our discussions at congregational meetings provide the context for making decisions. The votes of members enshrine those decisions into policy. To be truthful, we could do a lot better at being democratic. Simply by more of us attending these meetings, taking part in the discussions, voting in whatever way our conscience guides us. I think I counted 17 folks at our last congregational meeting, and we have more than 60 members in good standing. All members have a voice. As many as possible should make that voice heard. If folks don't attend these meetings, is it really fair to complain about the decisions we don't agree with? Our sixth principle says that we affirm and promote the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. An ambitious goal, to be sure, and probably more aspirational than attainable, but all steps in that direction are steps in the right direction. The actual language that frames our seven principles begins like this: we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, affirm and promote. So the commitment was originally by congregations rather than individuals. And in the case of this most ambitious principle, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, certainly the work must be done by congregations working together in association. And such work is done slowly, in small steps, and in the knowledge that when 3 individuals in the United States hold as much wealth as the bottom half of the population, a goal of community rather than dominance from their perspective cannot be readily assumed. So there are challenges to us as individual Unitarian Universalists, challenges to UU Middleboro, the first UU Society of Middleboro, challenges to the association as a whole, challenges to the world population as a whole. 8 billion of us, and I remember when it was 4 billion, and I remember when it was 3 billion before that. How do we respond to these challenges? By accepting one another while encouraging and supporting one another's spiritual growth, by honoring the human dignity of one another, by working together through democratic processes, by taking on personal challenges and societal challenges in ways small and large, by integrating into our lives the deep knowledge that we are all part of something much larger and more complex than we sometimes realize, the interdependent web of our existence on this planet that we share and have shared with all life forms, past, present, and future, by living according to the guidance of our 7 principles. So may it be, and so will it be, if we work to make it so.